She sat courtside as a teenager holding a sign that just said, "Thank you," and by the end of the night, a WNBA team owner had been banned from her own arena. Stay with me, because what happened after security got involved is the part almost nobody is reporting correctly, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the league had no choice but to act. Before we get into it, if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing, it takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps this channel keep covering stories like this one that a lot of other outlets are too nervous to touch. Okay, let's get into it. It started with a basketball interview. Not a press conference, not a scandal, just Sophie Cunningham sitting down with ESPN like dozens of players do every season. But one answer she gave turned into the loudest conversation in the WNBA this summer, and it hasn't stopped growing since. Before we get to that answer, it helps to understand why it carried so much weight coming from her specifically. Cunningham isn't some fringe player nobody's heard of. She's a veteran guard for the Indiana Fever. She plays alongside Caitlin Clark. And over the last couple of seasons, she's built a reputation as one of the more outspoken, physical, no-nonsense personalities in the league. She's the type of player who gets into scuffles defending her teammates, who says what she thinks without a filter, and who has never really tried to hide her political leanings. So when she weighs in on something this sensitive, it doesn't land like a random opinion. It lands like a headline. Cunningham was asked directly in that ESPN feature about her views on protecting women's sports. She didn't dodge it. She didn't give the safe, rehearsed non-answer that athletes are usually coached to give in media training. She said she wanted to protect young girls in locker rooms and in sport, and that they shouldn't have to compete against biological men. Then she added something that a lot of people conveniently leave out whenever this gets clipped and reposted. She said she extends love to everyone, that she's received a lot of criticism accusing her of hating the transgender community, and that she flatly rejects that characterization. She said there's room for absolutely everyone, and room to love everyone. But the part of the interview that stuck, the part that every outlet ran with, was the first half. Within hours, that interview was everywhere. It wasn't just basketball media picking it up anymore. It became a genuine national story. Reporters caught up with her again the very next day, before the Fever's game against the Connecticut Sun, clearly hoping she'd walk it back, soften it, or at least add some kind of clarifying disclaimer. She didn't. She told them, "I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense." And when journalists pushed further, asking if she was worried this could be used against the transgender community, she doubled down again, saying she'll never falter in that belief, that she's not a very political person, but she does have morals, and she's going to stay true to who she is. Now here's where the story stops being about one athlete's opinion and starts being about the machine that opinion plugged directly into. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. A month earlier, the Supreme Court had upheld laws in West Virginia and Idaho banning transgender athletes from competing on girls' sports teams. Days after that ruling, 2 transgender girls who had been the first to legally challenge a related executive order dropped their lawsuit in New Hampshire. And going back further, President Trump had already signed an executive order attempting to ban federally funded schools and colleges from allowing transgender athletes on women's teams, an order the administration has continued to enforce aggressively, including a lawsuit against the state of Minnesota over its own athletics policies. In other words, Cunningham didn't drop her comments into a quiet news cycle. She dropped them directly into the middle of the most contested legal and political fight in American sports. So it's not surprising that within a day, the White House was talking about her by name. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked directly whether President Trump had seen the comments. She confirmed he was following the story closely, called it something the president feels strongly about, and said flatly that men shouldn't be playing in women's sports, adding that the backlash Cunningham was receiving from critics was, in her words, astonishing. Conservative commentators and activists jumped on it almost instantly. Former swimmer turned activist Riley Gaines publicly praised Cunningham and challenged other athletes to follow her lead. Online, Cunningham picked up a new nickname almost overnight: MAGA Barbie, a label that stuck even harder after the White House reposted a meme of her from a UFC appearance. On the other side, critics pushed back just as hard. Harvard law instructor and trans rights advocate Alejandra Caraballo called her a bench player trying to build a platform off the backs of trans kids. Others online pointed out the obvious irony of political figures suddenly champion a WNBA role player they'd probably never watched play a single minute of basketball before this week. And through all of it, the Indiana Fever organization tried to stay above the fray, releasing a short statement to The Athletic saying its players are thoughtful adults with their own perspectives, that those views are their own, and that the franchise remains committed to welcoming fans from every background. Cunningham herself, for what it's worth, has tried to resist being fully boxed into either camp. In that same ESPN interview, she said she's very much in the middle politically, that she agrees with things on both sides and disagrees with things on both sides, and that people love to assume otherwise. Keep that in mind, because it matters for what happened next. This still isn't a story about someone trying to build a political brand. It's a story about one honest answer to one question, and the wildfire that spread from it in every direction. It also helps to understand that this fight didn't start with Cunningham, and the WNBA has been tiptoeing around it for years. The league's own Players Association put out a statement back in 2022 explicitly supporting transgender athletes competing in the sport that matches their gender identity, arguing that banning trans kids from sports cuts them off from a normal part of growing up. And yet the league's own current collective bargaining agreement states plainly that only players who are women are eligible to compete in the WNBA, without ever spelling out exactly how that gets defined or enforced. Former player Lashia Clarendon became the first person in league history to publicly come out as transgender and non-binary back in 2020. And to this day, no athlete who was born male has ever actually played in the WNBA. So a lot of what's playing out here isn't really about anything that's happening on a basketball court. It's about a policy debate the league has never fully resolved, suddenly getting dragged into the spotlight because one veteran guard gave a direct answer to a direct question. Even some of Cunningham's own teammates found themselves pulled into it without asking to be. Former teammate Brianna Turner, who played alongside Cunningham with both the Phoenix Mercury and the Fever, had actually written her own op-ed earlier in the year on the opposite side of this exact debate, after the International Olympic Committee moved to ban transgender athletes from its events. Two players on the same roster, two completely different positions, both dragged into the same national argument, neither one asking to be the face of it. That wildfire reached Seattle exactly 1 week later. The Indiana Fever were scheduled to play the Seattle Storm at Climate Pledge Arena, and in the days leading up to that game, something started brewing outside the building that had nothing to do with the scoreboard. A modest crowd gathered before tip-off. Some wore shirts from a brand called XX-XY Athletics, a company closely associated with the push to restrict women's sports to biological women. Some carried handmade signs. None of them targeted any Storm player by name. None of them were violent or aggressive. They were there because of the conversation Cunningham had started the week before, and because two specific ballot initiatives in Washington state, numbered 638 and 011, aimed at keeping transgender girls out of female school sports, have been gaining real traction throughout the state at the exact same time. This wasn't some organized campaign run by Cunningham or her team. Nobody with the Fever knew it was happening. It was just regular people showing up because a professional athlete had said something that resonated with them. And predictably, once word got out that a pro-Cunningham rally was forming outside Climate Pledge Arena, a counter-demonstration got organized almost as quickly, made up of people showing up specifically to oppose what Cunningham had said. So by the time fans actually started filing into the building that night, there were already two very different crowds gathered outside for two very different reasons before a single player had even stepped on the court. Inside the arena itself, the crowd made its feelings clear the moment Cunningham checked into the game. She was met with a mix of boos and cheers echoing throughout Climate Pledge Arena, a split reaction that basically mirrored exactly what was happening outside the building at the same time. It's worth noting, since a lot of clips of the boos went viral on their own, that most of the roughly 18,000 people in that building weren't there to make a statement one way or another. They were there to watch a basketball game, and for the most part, that's exactly what they got, right up until the moment something happened that had nothing to do with basketball at all. Two of those supporters ended up with courtside seats for the actual game, and they brought their signs inside with them. Nothing inflammatory, nothing that named a single Storm player. One sign read, "We love you, Sophie." The other read, "Thank you, Sophie, for speaking up for girls." That's the entire content of what they were holding. Two sentences of gratitude directed at a visiting player held quietly in the stands during a live WNBA game, while thousands of other fans around them cheered normally for both teams. Now stay with me, because what happened next is the actual reason this story detonated, and it barely has anything to do with basketball at all. Midway through the game, according to independent Seattle journalist Brandy Cruz, who was sitting right there with the two young women, a woman approached them. That woman was later identified by Cruz and by multiple national outlets, including Fox News and ABC News, as Celeste Keaton, a minority owner of the Seattle Storm. According to the account the fans gave directly to Cruz afterward, Keaton confronted them and, in their words, called them effing insane. The confrontation escalated from there. Security eventually got involved. And by the time the situation had calmed down, the two young women, visibly shaken, put their signs away. Not because arena staff told them to, despite what some of the early online rumors claimed. They put them away because, in their own account, they felt scared and uncomfortable after being confronted directly by an actual team owner in the middle of a sold-out arena. Sit with that for a second, because it's easy to skim past. This wasn't a rival fan yelling something ugly from a few rows back, the kind of thing that unfortunately happens at almost every sporting event. This was a person with an actual ownership stake in a professional sports franchise, walking up to two paying customers, one of them a teenager, during a live game, and losing her composure over a sign that thanked a visiting player for speaking her mind. Word spread almost immediately. By the next morning, this wasn't just a Seattle sports story anymore. Fox News Digital picked it up. ESPN ran it. A BC News ran it. The story had, in less than 24 hours, jumped from a courtside confrontation to a full-blown national headline, with the fine details, the shirts, the signs, the exact language used, being reported by multiple independent outlets that had all separately confirmed the core facts. Sports media itself split almost as sharply as the fans did. Some commentators argued the league had let this whole situation spiral out of proportion, pointing out that most fans inside the arena that night genuinely just wanted to watch a basketball game, and that a handful of viral clips of booing had gotten blown up into a story far bigger than what actually happened on the court. Others argued the opposite, that the WNBA's instinct to treat this as a distraction rather than confronting it directly was exactly the kind of avoidance that let something like the Keaton confrontation happen in the first place. One widely shared column even suggested that ignoring the whole saga might have been the league's smartest move, since, in the writer's view, nobody who was genuinely undecided on the underlying issue was ever going to have their mind changed by a WNBA role player's answer in a feature interview anyway. Whether or not you agree with that take, it tells you something important. Even people who cover this league for a living couldn't agree on whether this was a five-alarm crisis or a media-manufactured one. And that disagreement, more than anything else, is what kept the story alive for as long as it did. The Seattle Storm organization clearly understood how this looked because within a day, majority owner Ginny Gilder released an official statement. It said, in part, that the organization was aware one of its co-owners had made comments to two fans at the previous night's game, that they apologized for it happening, and that everyone who attends a Storm game deserves to feel welcome regardless of what they believe. Read that statement again, though, and pay attention to everything it deliberately leaves out. It doesn't name Keaton directly anywhere in the release. It doesn't explain what was actually said to the two fans, and it doesn't promise any concrete consequence beyond the apology itself. It reads exactly like what it almost certainly was, a carefully lawyered attempt to make an ugly story quietly disappear before it could get any bigger. Except it didn't disappear, because less than 24 hours later, the league stepped in over the team's head. The WNBA confirmed directly to multiple outlets, including Yahoo Sports, ESPN, and Fox News, that Celeste Keaton would be fined an undisclosed amount and suspended from attending the Storm's next 5 home games. 5 games. Banned from setting foot in her own team's arena over an incident with fans that the organization's own statement had already admitted happened. The Storm responded to the league's ruling with a short statement of their own, saying simply that they respected the league's decision and remained committed to a welcoming environment for anyone attending a Storm game. Storm head coach Sonia Rahman was asked about the fallout after the final buzzer and gave a fairly careful, guarded answer, saying, "The organization always wants Climate Pledge Arena to be a place where people feel welcome, and that they'd been working closely with arena security to make sure everyone felt safe." On the other side, a Fever team representative made a point of clarifying, before the game even started, that neither the organization nor Cunningham had any knowledge of the demonstration happening outside the arena and no contact whatsoever with whoever had organized it. Fever head coach Stephanie White mostly kept her post-game comments focused on the actual basketball, which, considering her team had just snapped a 7-game losing streak that same night, was probably a welcome change of subject for her either way. And Cunningham herself didn't stay quiet once the suspension news broke. She posted publicly that she truly believes there's a safe space and love for everybody: biological girls, biological boys, trans women, and trans men, and that everyone is welcome at her table, adding that you can disagree with someone and still be kind to them. But she didn't pull a single punch about what Keaton had actually done, calling her actions truly embarrassing and adding that it unfortunately shows the kind of leadership at play in that organization. She also had a direct message for the 2 young fans who'd been confronted, calling them brave for standing up for what they believe and promising that they'd be hearing from her personally soon. Here's the detail I really want you to sit with, because it's the part that gets lost every single time this story gets repeated online in 15-second clips. At no point in this entire sequence did Sophie Cunningham do anything except answer one honest question and then refuse to take it back when the pressure showed up. She didn't organize a demonstration. She didn't ask anyone to bring signs to Seattle. She had zero knowledge the rally outside the arena was even happening, and neither did her own franchise. Every single consequence that followed from that point forward, the boos from parts of the Seattle crowd when she checked into the game, the courtside confrontation, the 5-game suspension of an owner, the White House press briefing, the national headlines running for the better part of a week, all of it traces back to other people's reactions to 10 seconds of honesty in a feature interview. And that split reaction really is the whole story now. On one side, you had fans inside Climate Pledge Arena booing a visiting player for an opinion she gave in an entirely separate setting. On the other side, You had a team's own co-owner losing her composure at two teenagers holding a thank you sign. And layered over both of those, you had a groundswell of support large enough to reach the actual White House podium, alongside a wave of criticism from advocacy voices, arguing she was punching down at a community with almost no political power to begin with. One athlete, one interview answer, and an entire professional sports league forced to figure out in real time in front of national cameras exactly how it wanted to handle it. But before we get to where this leaves things, there's one more layer worth mentioning, because it explains why this story refuses to just fade away, like most WNBA controversies eventually do. This isn't only a story about Sophie Cunningham anymore. It's become a stand-in for a much bigger argument that's playing out across American sports and American politics at the exact same time, from state legislatures to the Supreme Court, to a sitting president's executive orders, to a professional basketball arena in Seattle. Every time this specific debate flares up anywhere else in the country, this Seattle Storm incident gets pulled back into the conversation as Exhibit A for whichever side is making their case. That's the real reason a 5-game suspension for one team owner turned into a story covered by ABC News, Fox News, ESPN, and the White House press room, all inside of about 48 hours. So where does this actually leave things right now? The suspension is only 5 games, which means Keaton will be back in her seat well before the season is anywhere close to over. The apology from ownership still never named her directly, and it never really addressed why a co-owner felt she had the standing to confront paying fans over a sign in the first place. Cunningham hasn't backed down a single inch, and by every indication from the last 2 weeks, she has no intention of starting now. And the actual underlying legal and political fight over who gets to compete in women's sports isn't going anywhere either. If anything, this one incident in Seattle just handed both sides of that national argument a brand new piece of ammunition to point to. Which means the real question isn't whether this story is finished. It's what happens the very next time Cunningham and the Storm share a court together. It's whether the WNBA continues to let ownership behavior like this slide with nothing more than a 5-game slap on the wrist. And it's whether the next fan who shows up to a game with a sign on either side of this debate gets treated any differently than these two young women did. That's where it stands as of right now. And given how fast this story has already moved in just 2 weeks, from an ESPN feature, to a White House press briefing, to a courtside confrontation, to a suspended owner, there is absolutely no reason to think this is anywhere near finished. If you want to see how this develops, and I promise you it will, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update on this. Let me know in the comments where you landed on this one, and I'll see you in the next video.